In 2013, I found myself standing here, witnessing a concentration camp for the first time. Most of 140,000 Rohingya Muslims were living in makeshift plastic tents built on muddy ground. They could not sit or sleep when it rained during months-long rainy season. No one was allowed to leave the camp. Thousands of children were suffering from extreme malnutrition, and many died because they were not allowed to go to the hospital. Seeing all this struck me to the core. I knew what discrimination was like, but my understanding of persecution changed after seeing how Muslims were treated. That visit was 6 years ago. Since then, Burma was transitioning from authoritarian to democratic government. We thought a new democratic government would represent all ethnicities and uphold civil rights. But violence and discrimination have only escalated. Since 2017, 723,000 Rohingya Muslims have fled to neighboring Bangladesh, and an estimated 10,000 have been killed. I spent 6 years writing about the violation of minority rights in Burma, and I can tell you that the atrocities committed against the Rohingya Muslims are just the latest form of persecution other ethnic minorities have faced for decades. Burma's democracy was not what we were promised. I was born in 1987 in the middle of a civil war. I am Kachin, one of many ethnic minority groups in Burma that have been demanding for indigenous rights and self-determination for decades. Growing up, I heard stories of the Burmese army violating human rights in Kachin state. The stories of the killing of civilians, raping women, and the burning of villages. At the same time, Burma was under strict repression. The oppressive military regime ensured that people did not have political knowledge. Independent media did not exist. State-run newspapers only generated propaganda. My mother used to warn me not to talk about the government outside our house because anyone who criticized the military was imprisoned. I couldn't comprehend any of this growing up. My family had fled from place to place for generations since 1962. And a civil war that had impacted me so profoundly was never mentioned in schools, in the news, or even in passing conversation. Now I understand that the military regime was trying to control the public in order to protect their power. The regime was threatened by the never-ending ethnic conflicts and the nationwide pro-democracy movement in 1988. They reacted with violence and took away our civil liberties. But if censorship and propaganda were meant to silence us, it had the opposite effect on me. I grew up eager to tell the story of the government's deliberate political persecution that I experienced. When the military regime finally agreed to democratic transition, I started working as a journalist. To millions of Burmese, the 2015 election was the beginning of a new era. On election day, I watched thousands of voters marching on the streets, filled with hope that the opposition party, led by Nobel Peace Laureate Aung San Suu Kyi, would finally form a civilian government that defends civil rights and political freedom. But we quickly realized that our optimism was misplaced. Ethnic and religious conflicts are far from being resolved. Just like the military regime before, the civilian government reacted criticism by clamping down on the public. More than 200 people had been arrested or charged for criticizing the government over the last 2 years. The government also uses military-enacted repressive laws to persecute journalists. At least 35 journalists had been arrested since 2016. In 2017, I saw myself how bad the situation had become. I was one of a few journalists taken on a rare government-organized trip to Rakhine State, the epicenter of the Rohingya crisis. The Burmese military had been accused of burning thousands of Rohingya villages' houses at the time, and the government desperately wanted to disprove those claims. During the trip, we were given photographs of what appeared to be the Rohingya villagers burning their own houses before fleeing. And then we were taken to a temporary shelter for Hindu villagers who also fled from the conflict in the region. As we interviewed a couple of villagers, we suddenly realized that these villagers were the same people from the photograph given to us. They even wore the exact same clothes on that day as it appeared on the photos. They were not Rohingya. It was clear that the photographs given to the journalists by the local authorities were staged. I reported about the incident and also the plight of other ethnic minority groups. I told the truth about what really happened and how the military and the government tried to cover it up. Then I started getting death threats on social media and legal threats from the authorities. It happened to many other journalists, especially those who report on atrocities in ethnic regions. I felt like I was pushed in a corner, and just like many other journalists, I decided to leave the country to avoid imprisonment or wars. We thought Burma was making progress, but now millions of people are living in fear again. Journalists and human rights activists are starting to self-censor. Freedom, democracy, equality, and human rights are again sensitive topics. Everything that's happening right now in Burma, it's so similar to what we endured during the military dictatorship. This is not real freedom or democracy that Burma wanted. Crimes against humanity and democracy cannot coexist. For my part, I will continue to report. When you were oppressed for so long, and for the first time you're able to use your voice, you don't want to go back to being voiceless again. What is happening in Burma is a lesson for all of us who want to see democracy in our countries. Democracy can pave the way for human rights and freedom. It is not inevitable or easy. But if we want democracy, we need to remain committed to its ideals and ensure freedom for all equally. Thank you.